My name is Dr. Daniel Fox, and I'm a licensed psychologist in the state of Texas and an expert in the area of personality disorders. And today I wanted to make a video on the similarities and differences between borderline personality disorder and narcissistic personality disorder. And I've gotten several requests of folks asking about the similarities and differences between these two disorders, and I thought that I would just make a video to sort of address this to help folks have a better understanding of the two disorders, because they are in the same cluster. Now, there's borderline personality disorder, narcissistic personality disorder, antisocial personality disorder, and histrionic personality disorder. Now, these four disorders cluster together. And the reason why they're called a cluster is because when you do research and you look at these particular personality features and aspects, when you do what's called a cluster analysis, you find that these behaviors cluster together. And so they're actually called cluster B personality disorders, according to the DSM-5, which is what we currently use to diagnose personality disorders. So we're not surprised that there is overlap between borderline personality disorder and narcissistic personality disorder, because they do cluster together. But there are differences as well, which helps them sort of be separate constructs or separate personality components. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Okay, so it's important to think about, okay, well, what's the benefit of knowing the differences? And I think that we find that with a lot of individuals with personality disorders, and those who have traits as well, that impaired insight, that confusion or difficulty in self-understanding is what prevents a lot of folks from moving forward. And so part of what my hope is with the videos is that I'm providing a helpful resource for folks to build this sense of self-understanding and insight, which can help build this sense of efficacy to move you forward so that you can engage in treatment, so you can do things differently, have better relationships, not only with others, but with yourself as well. So build that sense of self-understanding. Okay, so let's talk about what are some key points, and what are some tactical tips that I can provide for you before we get into the nook and crannies here of it. Well, both borderline personality disorder and narcissistic personality disorder, that they actually occur in about 1 to 2% of the general population, and that's according to the National Alliance on Mental Illness. Okay, so only 1 to 2% actually meet criteria for the full disorder. Now, there are more folks that don't meet criteria for the full disorder, but what they do is they have what are called traits, and these are aspects of those different personality disorders, but they don't have all of those features, so they don't meet all of those. And when you just have traits, there's actually an improved prognosis, okay, than if you meet the full criteria for the full disorder. But that doesn't mean if you have the full disorder to lose all hope and, oh my gosh, that's not what that means. Okay, so I want to make sure that just because if you have been diagnosed with the full disorder, or you do meet criteria for the full disorder, that doesn't mean you don't have hope about doing things differently for yourself and helping yourself. Okay, so that's real important to know. Also, what's interesting is that those who have borderline personality disorder, also 25% of those also have narcissistic personality disorder. So what we find is that from that 1 to 2%, that those that have borderline personality disorder or narcissistic personality disorder, a quarter of those, 25%, also have the other. Okay, so that means that those who have narcissistic personality disorder, 25% of those also have borderline personality disorder. Those who have borderline personality disorder, 25% of those also have narcissistic personality disorder. And why is that? Well, that goes to what we're talking about today, those similarities. And so let's get into that now. Let's talk about what are those similarities. Well, what we see in both of the personality disorder of narcissistic and borderline personality disorders, we see that there is a fear of abandonment. Both have this fear of abandonment, but the way they go about it is very different. Okay, so for your narcissistic personality disorder spectrum individual, is that their fear of abandonment, the way that they deal with it is by being more controlling, more demonstrative, using a lot of manipulative strategies, but very sort of containing power-based, the sense of self-satisfaction, the sense of security that you're not going to leave me because I control you. For your borderline personality disorder individual, that fear of abandonment tends to have a higher degree of, I want to say desperation, but it's more of a manipulative that if you leave me, I'll fall apart. It's more of a sort of a passive aggressive type of style that, as I'm so afraid of me losing you, that I lose me. So they become very passive, very submissive in a lot of ways. At times they can also be aggressive and manipulative, but it's in a different sort of framework, as opposed to it fills me with this sense of need and power, which you would have for your narcissistic individual. But for your borderline individual, it's just more of this frightened desperation of abandonment. Now, the next feature is that they both have stormy relationships. Now, these stormy relationships, you see it at work, you see it in family, you see it in social settings. Now, they both have these difficulties, these disruptions. Okay? And then they both have impaired insight. But we know, if you've seen my other videos as well, that tends to be that universal criteria for all personality disorders, is that impaired insight. And what happens is this impaired insight, it adversely impacts motivations and consequences. So if you know someone, or if you yourself have either of these disorders or another personality disorder, that what happens is you engage in behaviors, and a lot of times until you're experiencing those consequences, are you like, I shouldn't have done, this doesn't make sense to me. Why am I having this conclusion and this confusion? And people around you, or perhaps you're like, why wouldn't he or she know that? That's that impaired insight. That's that difficulty in slowing down, realizing if I engage in this behavior, there's a high probability of this negative outcome. So they have that impaired ability, and treatment, what that does is builds that sense of insight. That's what I'm also hoping to do with these videos as well. Okay, but the similarities, that they don't stop there, right? So we know, as we were just talking about, that impaired insight. Well, there's also treatment compliance, difficulties with treatment compliance. Both have difficulties with treatment compliance, and this is because out of a fear of change. So they're afraid of doing things differently. Now look at it this way. If you were like, well, if someone is constantly causing problems in their life, wouldn't they be motivated to do things differently? Well, what I end up working with and talking with my clients about is that, well, the problem is, even if they're maladaptive patterns, and they're harmful, at least you know what they are. There's an odd sense of security in that. And there's an odd sense of comfortability in the chaos that it creates. And at least I know that if I do this, I have this. If I engage in change, and I understand, a part of them understands that probability of success and doing things better may be a better outcome for them later, but it's frightening to do that. It's frightening to engage in that because they're unsure of what that possible ripple effect might be. Okay, so it's that sort of difficulty with treatment compliance out of fear of change. And poor boundaries, both have poor boundaries for your narcissistic spectrum individuals. They are usually very demonstrative, very controlling, very aggressive in a lot of ways. Whereas your borderline folks, they tend to turn things inward as opposed to being outward. Their boundaries are sometimes, of course, they do impact the boundaries of others, and they're aggressive at times as well. But they often infuse themselves in others' boundaries. So they cause this disruption in connection with others. Both tend to also have cognitive distortions, and that means that they're not reading the environment as it actually is. So if we don't accurately read the environment, how do we accurately decide how to respond? Okay? And if you're noticing, well, aren't a lot of these connected? They are connected. A lot of these are connected in those personality disorders, and we see it in both your borderline folks, your narcissistic folks, and those that have comorbid borderline personality disorder and narcissistic personality disorder as well. Both have a strong need for constant attention. Okay, so they're always trying to be noticed, be seen. Your narcissistic individual does that for this sense of satisfaction and having the spotlight on them and being noticed, whereas a lot of your borderline folks, or folks that have borderline personality disorder, that they need that constant attention to know that they won't disappear, that they are present, that they are recognized, and that they have value. Okay. And then the last one, they both have the sense of idealization and devaluation. Now, for folks with borderline personality disorder, a lot of us aren't surprised to hear that, right? That you'll idealize people at one point, and then the expectations are so high and often unrealistic that when that person doesn't match that, but remember there's cognitive distortions as well, so it doesn't mean that other person actually engaged in sort of odd, fraudulent, inaccurate behavior, but is perceived that way. Then they are quickly devalued. Okay, and this is often an ebb and flow that I experience in working with my clients as well. But narcissistic individuals with narcissistic personality disorder, also have issues of idealization and devaluation. Now, these folks, they idealize those who they think have status that they want or deserve. So they idealize them. So I would like to be like such and such because they're wealthy, they're powerful, whatever it may be, they're attractive, whatever it may be. And then they tend to devalue those who aren't at this very, very, very unique level, and they devalue all others, saying that they're often stupid, incompetent, things of that nature. So those are our similarities. Okay? Well, what about the differences? What separates these two folks? Okay, these two conditions. Well, the difference is that for individuals with narcissistic personality disorder, they tend to have a lot of grandiosity. You tend to not see that with individuals with borderline personality disorder. They tend to have a stable self-image, so they tend to present in a consistent way. Their beliefs and values, their vocational goals are at a higher likelihood to be stable, whereas those with borderline personality tend not to have that. They tend to have an unstable self-image. This is also a video that I talked about a while back, and their self-image is often shifting goals, values, and beliefs to sort of fit in with the group around them so that they can connect to others and not feel so alone. In addition, some other factors for narcissistic personality separate from your borderline folks. It's a need of admiration and expectation of special treatment. Your borderline folks typically don't have that. Fantasies of unlimited power and success for your narcissistic spectrum individuals along that spectrum. You don't see that with folks with borderline personality disorder. Typically, folks with borderline personality disorder, they have a very low value of self. They tend to have a high need to connect to others, whereas a lot of narcissistic individuals, outwardly, they seem, well, I don't need anybody because I'm so special and unique, and that because there's only enough room on the top of the pyramid or the mountain for just me, and that's of course what I deserve. Whereas your borderline folks tend not to feel that way. They tend to feel this sense of brokenness, this sense of aloneness, this sense of emptiness, and fear of abandonment that they carry with them. Okay, in a lot of ways. Additionally, for your borderline personality disorder folks, fantasies of loss, chaos, of impending abuse, and that doesn't mean that abuse did not happen. It's the chaos and this fear of impending abuse, of this recapitulation, which means that it continues on and on. So every relationship will be abusive because those early relationships that sort of set that prototype has already been put in place. Okay, you don't see that. Now that doesn't mean that those who have narcissistic personality disorder, those individuals, that they haven't been abused as well. They very well may have, and you do to see that often as well. Typically a lot of emotional abuse, physical abuse, things of that nature for those narcissistic individuals. And so folks with narcissistic personality disorder, they expect the lives of others to revolve around them. For your borderline personality disorder, individuals that have that or those traits, that they will revolve their life around others. Okay? So it's very different. It's two opposite sides of that same coin about that interpersonal circle, about how we build folks into our interpersonal circle. The next aspect is those with narcissistic personality disorder, when they tend to engage in a suicide attempt, that associated with it's less impulsive suicide attempts, but they also tend to be more lethal. And suicide attempts in narcissistic individuals typically come after or subsequent to what's called a narcissistic wound, and that can be domestic strife that they didn't expect, a divorce that they didn't expect, financial ruin that they didn't expect. Could be health related as well, something they get a diagnosis that of a terminally ill or a very debilitating disease, and they can't handle that, and that narcissism, it becomes internalized, and that narcissistic wound causes that individual to try to end their life. For your borderline personality disorder individuals, so suicide attempts typically associated with a lot of impulsive acts. In a lot of ways, tend to be due to very severe emotional pain. It's or a way of communicating distress to an identified object of other. Okay, and that object that is often a way of that communication is usually a significant other, a family member, or a therapist, or trying to tell them how much they hurt. The problem with that is that those folks they're trying to communicate it with don't understand that that's what's happening, and fear kicks in, and hospitalization and other types of issues. So what it does is it puts that individual, that borderline personality individual, on this sort of whirlpool, whereas they think, okay, well, people are going to come rescue me, but in a lot of ways it doesn't work out that way. So the act of self-harm may get them attention, so their need is half met, but it may not get them to be rescued the way that they expect. So that's something that I see a lot in my clients. It may be different for yourself or a loved one, but that's often what I see. And of course, every suicide attempt needs to be taken seriously, and to call 911, call emergency if you know someone is suicidal or contemplating suicide. That's very, very important. Okay, so today, what we did in this video, we talked about those similarities and differences between borderline personality disorder and narcissistic personality disorder. Okay, and I think that knowing these differences, I hope, will help you understand yourself a little better. If you do feel like you have either of these disorders or both, about talking with a mental health provider who can help you discern it and to build that sense of insight for self and other, for yourself, to have better control over these issues. I hope that you enjoyed this video. I certainly appreciate your time very much, and if you've enjoyed it, check out my other ones. That'd be great. And if you like it, please subscribe. That'd be fun. Thank you very much, and I appreciate your time, and please be well. Thanks. Bye-bye.